This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Melinda Conman with PNA Foundation, and I thank you for joining us today for this session, Amplifying Diverse Voices in Your Coverage and Newsroom. This is the second in the PNA Foundation Special Diversity Series, Leading Local, the media's impact on diversity, inclusion, and equity. Our first session in March focused on building a culture of respect at work, and our next webinar is set for June 18th and features Melba Newsome, a fellow at the Reynolds Journalism Institute. She'll be sharing the results of her research project, 10 Steps to More Inclusive Reporting. We're also finalizing details for an August session on seeing the whole community, which will help editors and reporters visually cover their entire community. Please be sure to check our website for more information and to register in the coming weeks. I did put the link in the chat room for that upcoming session as well. This diversity series is made possible through a grant from the Calkins Foundation, and we thank them, as well as our outstanding panelists and a moderator for today's session. Just a few reminders that today's session is being recorded. Feel free to put your questions in the chat room or in the chat box, which you can find on the right side of your screen, or just unmute yourself and identify who you are. We invite you to use your webcams so that an open discussion can occur. Again, thank you for joining us. I'm going to turn it over to Joyce Davis and wish you all a good session. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Melinda, and thank to everyone for joining us, and particularly to our panelists, who I will introduce now. We are looking forward to a very engaging and frank discussion about some difficult topics. So we are happy to have Chris Baxter, who is Editor-in-Chief of Spotlight PA, with us, Sandy Clark, who's Vice President for News and Civic Dialogue with WHYY, John Micek, Editor-in-Chief of the Pennsylvania Capital Star and Estrella-Capital, Hollis Towns, Vice President of Local News Initiatives and Atlantic Regional Editor for USA Today Network. Welcome, panelists. It's great to have you here with us.
Thank you.
All right. We're going to get right into it. Look, we all have been talking about diversity. We all are trying to figure out how to do it right this time. And I say this time because this isn't the first time that I have been part of conversations that says we have to do more to diversify our newsrooms. This has been a decades-long journey, or maybe some would even say centuries-long journey. So I guess what I want to open up with is, why do we think we'll get it right this time, and why? I mean, what has led us to this urgency now to suddenly get things right? Who wants to take the first shot at that? Chris, let me ask you, what's the impetus for why we have such intensity now around diversity efforts?
Sure, thanks, Joyce. If I can, before I answer that, I just wanted to thank PNA for hosting this and for its commitment to diversifying our newsrooms and coverage. It's really helpful to have an ally in the News Media Association in the state. That helps a lot. I also just wanted to share two things because I think they're important to note. One, as myself as a white newsroom leader, I made my participation on this panel contingent on the rest of the panel being representative of a diverse cross-section of backgrounds and experiences. And I think that's something we can all do whenever we participate in events, conferences, panels, is insist on that. It's a small but important thing. And of course, PNA delivered. I also think it's important to note, again, from my perspective as a white male, that these discussions, I really try to sort of decenter myself, my experience, and the same goes when I talk to my team. And that doesn't mean sort of abdicating responsibility as the leader, but it means not allowing kind of my experience and perspective to dominate the conversation, and to really open up that space to my teammates and have a more full discussion and centering sort of action-oriented listening, as I like to talk about as a leader. So I just wanted to start with those two things because I think those are really important points and things we can all take forward. Joyce, to your question, I mean, I think part of the shift we're seeing, I think, is generational. Younger generations are more dominant, not just in reporting positions, but also starting to move up into editing and management positions. And I think that's helping drive it. That's not to say, other generations aren't committed, but I do get a sense among younger folks that there's just less of an acceptance of the status quo. They're just not going to go quietly and accept what really has failed time and time again. I also think, honestly, the ongoing unionization of newsrooms across the country continues to be a catalyst for this transformation. If reporters are organized and have a unified voice, part of that is they can talk about and insist on making these issues first, and foremost. So I think that's part of it. And also, finally, I'll just say, I think, Spotlight PA, Capital Star, other sort of nonprofit newsrooms, diversity and equity are just part of the, they're part of the demand from our readers in service to the public. And we hear that, and it's also part of the demand from our funders. So it's, at least in the space we operate, this is just sort of part and parcel of what the public and our members expect, and why wouldn't we do that? It's sort of baked in. So I think that from my perspective, those are a few things that I think are driving this.
Okay, thank you, and thanks for reminding us to thank PNA for having this opportunity for us to dialogue. Sandy, why don't I bring you into the conversation? I'm surprised though to hear that nothing about Black Lives Matter and nothing about the what happened to George Floyd. Is that at all an underpinning of where we are today in society and in this push in newsrooms for diversity?
Sure. I think, listen, there's a lot of people who discovered racism last year, right? And meanwhile, there are those of us who have been doing this work. I came into journalism years ago as one of those, quote, diversity hires, right? As newsrooms are saying, we need more representation. We need to really make sure, we're serving communities in the way we're supposed to. And through all of these years, this has just been an ongoing battle. So I think the funders had an awakening in terms of who they support. Look, there was a multicultural, multi-generational group of people who, saw what happened to George Floyd and could not turn their eye. Up to that point, for many, I think seeing these issues was optional, right? In our newsroom, I have to, give a nod to Chris to talking about this, from the perspective as a white newsroom leader too, because for too long, this kind of work has been dependent on a few of us, mostly people of color, who are, fighting our own equity battles within our organizations. And at the same time, we have, I think personally and professionally felt that this was part of our mission to lead. So we've always kind of carried this, and we can't do it alone. So that having white editors, white leaders say this is an imperative and we're going to lead from this seat is really critical to real change happening. I think last year was the thing that made so many news organizations wake up, but at the same time at HYY and the work that we're doing, and we'll talk more about that later, but I'm not trying to make more woke people. If we are trying to meet the mission of journalism, which is, I think, where most of us got into this to make a difference, to really have impact on our communities, then this isn't, really about, just doing something that we think is nice or, kind of throwing around a bunch of buzzwords. This is really about meeting the mission of why we got into this industry to make this kind of a change.
Thank you, John. I see you nodding your head with that. Do you want to have any comments or any perspective on why suddenly so many more people are woke?
Joyce, thank you for having me, and thanks to Melinda and PNA as well. Let me spread the love around the Zoom room this morning. But I think Sandra and Chris addressed this so eloquently. There has been, I think, a generational shift. I see it in my journalists who are committed to ensuring that a broader array of voices are represented in our coverage. And it's also something that's baked into the mission of the Capital Star, and Chris alluded to this as well. It's right there on our About page in our mission statement, to elevate underrepresented voices, to elevate underheard voices, to make sure that we give our readers a website that looks like Pennsylvania. and it's been, and I will echo Chris on this as well. It's been very important for me as a, as a white middle-aged guy who's been doing this for, 20 something years, to get out of the way, and to let those voices be centered, to listen. And I'm realizing how much I too, even, at my age, have to learn to get out of the way and to let those voices be centered and let them be the sort of the leading voices of our coverage, and my helping sort of to elevate them and give them that platform from which to speak.
Thank you, John. And Hollis, I want to bring you in here because you're representing a pretty large organization. I'm sure diversity has always been on your agenda, but do you sense something has changed in the past year? But we got to hear you, Hollis.
Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. I was going to say that I think Sandra put it best when she talked about folks discovering all of a sudden that racism exists. It's been around for a long time. And, candidly, a lot of organizations have done nothing more than paid lip service to it. There hasn't been really any follow-up. There hasn't been really any insistence that the communities that we cover be reflected in the makeup of our organizations. And so we've talked about, the ASME's, job census, where we looked at hiring folks of color, but we failed miserably at ensuring that that happens. And so in Gannett, we're trying. We obviously are recruiting people of color, but it's a difficult process when, folks now have discovered that all of a sudden they want Black folks and brown folks and Asians and others to be a part of the team because of the wokeness that happened in light of the George Floyd killing murder that was for all the world to see. And then suddenly this blast of interest in diversity, equity, and inclusion became a popular thing to do. To me, the question isn't why it's happening now. To me, the question is how long will it last? And to me, that becomes the challenge, because as the anniversary of Floyd's death approaches and we get past that, will interest wane and we're back to business as usual, where no one really cares about these issues, no one cares about hiring. It becomes more of a background noise than, the forefront of the conversation, which is what it is now.
Hollis, I think you raised an extraordinarily important question, because as I say, we've been through this before, and we can see how that passion can turn to lukewarmness and all of that, and really turn cold at times. So let's talk about now really what your newsrooms are doing. This is a complex issue. It involves not only hiring, but it involves the kind of ideas, who you think your audience is. So can we step into talking about just what is happening in your newsrooms as a result that will really concretely promote diversity? John, why don't you start this time?
I mean, gosh, I mean, it's shot through, I think, Joyce, everything we do, from the way we write headlines to the op-eds that we select for the commentary section to the voices that we include in the coverage. I mean, it is a very deliberate effort on our part, not to, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for here, to sort of balkanize those voices, but to make sure that they are part of everything that we do every single day, that we don't talk to transgender individuals simply because we are doing a transgender orientated story, but because we are talking to them because they are impacted by a piece of legislation or a story in some way. It's in the way that we write headlines. I mean, we have a op-ed on the site this morning, I think of this immediately, about the impact of the Roe v. Wade decision. And the headline came across as it allowed, Roe v. Wade changed the way women, gave women more flexibility in having children, or something to that effect. The head, when it ran on our site, was Roe v. Wade gave people who can get pregnant more flexibility in having children, recognizing that there are people who are capable of reproducing who may not necessarily identify as women, and it's important to have that inclusivity on the site. And it comes down to even things like that, the way you conceive of of headlines or source selection or everything else. I mean, it's included in everything we do, and it's something that I talk to with my journalists about every single day.
Sandra, you want to weigh in on this?
Sure. John brings up it's such an important point. We started a couple of years ago, about 3 or 4 years ago, a project that I just called Creating a Culturally Competent Newsroom. And it had, and the purpose of that was to set in place, to embed in our newsroom something that would live if I left, if others left who were, committed to this work, so that we just had a daily practice. Various components of that. I mean, one is, really looking at the diversity of sources that we were, who are the people we were talking to? Who are the voices we already were amplifying? And what we found from our initial audit was 80% of the people we talked to were white. The majority of them, were the academic experts, and I call them the ABC experts because there's all these, letters behind their names. But were we talking to people who were impacted? And I think that mirrored, frankly, the diversity of our newsroom, or the lack of diversity of our newsroom. I inherited a newsroom that was 80% white. And for a newsroom that really was formed about 7 or 8 years ago, I mean, that's kind of pretty inexcusable, right? Where you had a chance to create something from, really form something from the beginning. So, but I think John's point, I mean, and so our sources, the source work we've been doing, and by the way, we are happy to, many organizations call us to ask how we're doing our audits and how we're tracking our source diversity, and we are happy to share that with anyone. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We look for others to refine it, and then we crib from them. So tracking, that daily tracking builds that muscle for how we look at what voices we amplify. But also it's key to also look at how we frame stories, right? And so, talking about, whose voices are centered in our journalism. You can diversify your sources till the end of time. But if we're still framing stories from the position of whiteness, then we've got a problem. So I feel as though, we've done lots of training. This has to be paired with training. I don't assume that people understand the work, but to get to this point where it's truly an embedded practice in our newsroom, partnered with a lot of deep community engagement work. People have to see us. We can't just swoop in and cover a story, and it's usually in crisis. So people have to see us day after day after day. So we've partnered that work with deep community engagement. And I think that we are making a difference. Narratives kill, and some of these narratives that are perpetuated, we can talk about misinformation now. Misinformation has existed for a long time, and frankly, journalism has contributed to a lot of that as well.
Right. Listen, hearing John and Sandy, Chris, I want to ask you, I mean, they also raise this issue of sourcing, and one of my irritants is that you go to Black people for Black stories. You don't go to Black people for science stories or for math stories. Or I remember always the assumption when I was in international affairs that I was the Africa expert. No, I was the Middle East expert. So how are you breaking through those stereotypes and not just going to Black sources or Latino sources or whatever for those issues?
Yeah. So one thing we did last year, we put together with the support of PNA, the first state-based diverse source database of experts of color, sort of a small but meaningful move in this direction. And that was really an effort to eliminate the excuse that I think we've all heard, maybe some of us have used. I'm writing about X topic, like you say, I'm writing about science, transportation, whatever, and someone will say, well, I don't know any experts of color that know anything about transportation. It's like, well, of course, that's nonsense. So building this database, we're sort of trying to eliminate that excuse by giving a resource to reporters and saying, no, here's something you can go to. That's not an acceptable answer. But then the sort of second part of that is what Sandra and John have talked about. It's all about integration, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not just building a tool, right? The tool does nothing if nobody uses it. So building the tool, making the resource, eliminating the excuse, but then integrating that practice into our copy flow, right? So editors now, as part of their standard question, what's the headline? Have you checked your facts? Who are your sources? How have you tried to diversify them? What perspectives have you sought? That's part and parcel of the editing process. And I think that's, that's how it has to be, I think, to really get to a place where what you're talking about, it's not just sort of these, token experts. And I think a second thing, though, is really thinking about what we mean when we say expert. And that's something we've tried to pay a lot of attention to as well, as Sandra mentioned, not just the academics, but really thinking, what about lived experience, looking beyond someone's degrees or their business role, both of which, by the way, also have their own systemic racist issues, which is why there are so many white males in those roles. So we're not just dealing with, where journalism is, but we have to be cognizant of how people advance in these other fields that we look at and consider to be leaders or experts as well.
Yeah, thank you. And Hollis, I want to bring you in here because they've raised also the issue Sandy did of training. And, I will tell you, I just participated in training for a group of people around understanding of biases that you may have and not perceive it. And the group thought they were really far along in accepting. And it comes to find out the reality of it is that they're quite closed and quite unwilling to change. But they didn't realize that. So have you made progress? I mean, are you doing that kind of training in the newsrooms throughout your network? And is it something you would recommend to the other organizations?
Oh, absolutely. That training is ongoing. It's both internal and external. Before COVID, we were working very closely with Porter on various training exercises around diversity, the Maynard Institute, and others. And so also in-house, that training entails internal conversations about, bias in story coverage. It pertains to how we approach sources and to Chris's point about having conversations with folks within the community and seeking folks outside of the letters behind their names to deal with real people in the community. It has to be authentic. And one of the things that organizations make the mistake of doing all the time is not setting the standards. We hire people, we put them in these jobs, and we let them go without telling them what the expectations are, especially as it relates to diversity. And I think one of the things, and we're certainly doing this in Gannett and certainly in my newsrooms, is lay out what those expectations are. Talking to folks in those underserved communities, go there and have coffee, look for all types of stories, talk to folks outside of the traditional expert list that you have. And so that starts with the leadership in the newsroom, talking first about moving beyond the expected and talking to the unexpected. I remember being at Porter, and my good friend Keith Woods talked about listening posts. In that exercise, it was the very first race and diversity session that Porter had put on, and Keith was leading that. And in that conversation about listening posts, he talked about going to places in the community where you can learn things perhaps you didn't know. And one particular place stood out to me that I utilized for many years when I was a reporter. He said, if you're ever on the cop beat and you're worried about trying to figure out what's happening in the community, go to the funeral home director. He knows everything. he knows how the person died. He knows the family's state of affairs. You can get a lot of more info friending the funeral director in the corner than you can from the police chief. And so I let that be a lesson to me that as I worked as a reporter and I've shared with my team since then, let's go beyond those traditional sources and find folks that can help us tell stories differently and tell those stories more authentically than what the experts or what authorities say.
Got it. Well, look, it's clear all of you are committed to this. You really are pushing forward. You've got great ideas. You've got, you really want to make it work. So what are the obstacles? I mean, what are you facing honestly as obstacles? One of the things I think about, especially with newsrooms like Hollis, is that you can get people in, but they may not feel like their full self is able to be expressed and all their talents and all of that, and they then get disgruntled and try somewhere else. I mean, what are some of the obstacles that you see, Chris? First of all, when you hire, when you recruit, you bring them in, what obstacles are there to even getting a more diverse staff covering these issues?
Well, I think the first thing is starts with hiring, right? So we have sort of our traditional way we've always done it, and in a lot of ways that doesn't work. So one thing is looking at what's in that job posting. That could be self-eliminating, or that's some kind of qualifier that just has always been in a job posting because that's what's in job postings, but doesn't really matter. So for example, we've taken out things like degree attainment, and other elements or descriptions of jobs that may cause either BIPOC candidates or female applicants to sort of self-eliminate. Think, oh, I'm not that, so this isn't a job for me, even though they probably most likely would be very good for the job. That's one. Two is we've really reconsidered. We struggle in central Pennsylvania to attract candidates of color, as particularly if they need to be in this location. And that's not to say, there aren't really thriving and growing diverse communities in central Pennsylvania. There absolutely are, but it's not viewed, particularly from folks outside the state, as a place that's very favorable to living. So we have expanded our remote offerings. So reporters, for the most part, can be remote anywhere in Pennsylvania, again, as sort of a better option to diversify the pool, and non-reporting positions can be remote anywhere. So that part has helped. And beyond that, it's about being patient, but also you've got to do the work. You can't post a job, post it to the job board, send it to the affinity groups, sit back and wait for them to roll in. It's just not going to happen. You have to go out and do the hard work, contact the HBCUs, contact the university programs, start early, identify folks, track them, really make that investment. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. But if you don't do that, you're not going to get where you want to be. And I think that, honestly, it's that piece that has perpetuated so much of this, is people say, all right, I want to hire, I want a diverse pool. Great. I do all these things. I don't get a diverse pool. Well, I tried, but there's no one there. And then they move forward and they make a hire. That has to change. I mean, we have to keep jobs open longer, and we have to put in the legwork if this is truly what we want. It can't just be a box to check.
Right. And I'll tell you, your point about central Pennsylvania and minorities is an interesting one, although I do recall I came here from Prague and decided this was going to be my home. And one of the first things I was told was, oh, you won't stay here. You won't like it. So I don't know what that's about, but it's a wonderful place to live. John, you want to chime in here? What are some of the obstacles that you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I listening to Chris, I mean, we have just similarly gone through a hiring process and facing those exact same challenges, trying to attract qualified BIPOC candidates, and most often running into these sort of the central Pennsylvania barrier. That is, it's hard to sort of understate what a deterrent that is for a lot of candidates who come from urban areas like Philadelphia or Pittsburgh or outside of the area. It feels like sometimes there's a sign that says "Beyond here there be dragons," and they don't come, and that becomes a real challenge. And Chris was right. You really do have to go out there and do the legwork, and we did a lot of that. With this latest hiring process that we went through, and unfortunately we did not, we weren't able to meet that goal, but it's something we are working on at all times. It was extraordinarily challenging trying to go through that process, but it is something that we remain committed to at all times, and committed to sort of developing, as Chris said, developing that bench of talent so that when openings do present themselves, we've tracked these candidates and built relationships with them.
Now, Sandy, you shouldn't have the problem of central Pennsylvania. You're there in the big Philly market, so everybody wants to be in Philly, right?
Yeah, I'm in the Philly market where everybody's looking to poach. So there we go. It does take work, and what I do appreciate is I have a big, wide network of people who are calling me when somebody's in high school and saying, hey, here's somebody to keep an eye on, or when someone's a freshman or sophomore in college, and I build into my time just introductory meetings, right? And then I do these regular check-ins with people and say, hey, where are you? Wait, are you graduating yet? You know, just to make sure that that door is open. I didn't have entrance to the door of a VP or you know, an editor, top editor, as I was coming up. And I think it's really important to just have that personal touch as we go through this. And they also tell you about their friends. And so you're kind of working with their networks as well. You know, it is a challenge to, listen, I'm not that far separated from journalists of color that we're trying to attract to. I mean, when I think of what it means to me to be in an organization and how they keep me as well, you know, it's important for me to have a board that is committed to this work, you know, that it had to have a CEO that's committed to this work. So, you know, I need to see something happening through the organization, just as everyone else who comes in the door, regardless of position, needs to see that too. You know, our board has very actively worked on diversifying the board, both the major board as well as the community advisory board. Post George Floyd, you know, started a cultural, a social responsibility program that's includes, you know, what's the diversity of vendors that we use, you know, what's the diversity of our staff, you know, what's the diversity of our programming. And so that kind of inside out work is really, really necessary, I think, for an organization to be fully committed to this. And that's what it takes, I think, for sustainability, you know. So it's just not just one of these things that, as Hollis was saying, it was really important for 1 year and then everybody moved on.
Yeah, Hollis, let's bring you in. You've heard how hard it is for our friends in central Pennsylvania, but you've got the whole nation, right? That you can play. So let's talk about how you're doing and what are your obstacles?
You know, it really depends on the market, and we've got 3 publications there: Chambersburg, Lebanon, and York in Central PA that are Gannett publications, and you know, we have challenges there in filling those positions, but you know, there aren't insurmountable challenges, and I think it starts with, you know, the support system. You know, anytime you attract someone to a market, there has to be a system in place where they will feel nurtured and feel like they are a part of the community, feel like they're a part of the organization. So first and foremost, what we try to do is lay out a foundation where folks will feel welcomed. And then we connect them with mentors and partner them in that way so they will feel a part of the broader company. And then the third piece of that is give them opportunities to grow. Look for opportunities for them to move to that next level, a clear pathway forward. And I think if you're able to lay that out very succinctly and clearly in the early days of recruiting, you can have success not only with people of color, but with top level talent and recruiting them to the organization. And so that's what we've done in Central PA. That's what we've done in New Jersey, in Florida, and other parts of the country. It works to varying degrees of success. In some markets, you know, we're going gangbusters. We're doing well recruiting in North Dakota. Believe it or not, there are people of color who want to live in North Dakota. Not me, but there are people who want to live there. But, you know, to each his own. But it depends on, you know, the leadership and incentivizing that. And I will just make one final thought on that, and that is that what gets measured gets done. And so whenever a corporation or an organization lays out with specificity, here's what our expectations are, here's what we're looking for, generally managers will strive to reach those goals. And so if we've ensured that at the highest level, from the board to the CEO down to the managers in the trenches, that diversity, inclusion, and equity are part of who we are and what we do, and it's a part of our bonus plan or part of our payroll, then I think we'll see a lot more success than what we've seen in the past.
Very good. I want to invite also the people, our journalist colleagues who are participating in this. If you have questions, you can write them in, or you can just insert yourself if you want to, or let me know in some way that you want to address a question or even a comment if there's something you want to share along these ways. So there is a question that's come in. What benchmark should news media organizations be setting for themselves in regards to diversity? Thank you for that, Matt, because that is exactly where I was going with this. I wanted to ask each one of our speakers, if your organization has set some benchmarks, if you have set some goals and timelines, because just as Hollis was sharing with us, if you don't know where you're going, if you don't have at least a sense of when you should be reaching this so that you can reconnoiter and figure out what you're doing wrong, it's going to be hard for you to really make progress. So, Chris, have you set any goals, any benchmarks, any timetables?
Yeah, I mean, we have rough benchmarks, but we're such a small team that it really comes down to sort of every opening, every position we have is a full-on effort. That small team percentages are kind of wacky, but I think just we look at it from a position to position basis, wanting starting from the point of we want this position to be a diverse hire, so not 25% or 35% or whatever. But starting from that point, and going from there. But also, I mean, I think we look at it again more holistically in terms of how well these aspects are being integrated across our entire room. And sometimes I think when we set just a number goal, it sort of minimizes what has to be done. This is not like we have to do X, Y, and Z, and we'll be at the finish line. In my mind, there's no real finish line, right? This is a constant evolving process. It's about learning, it's about integrating, it's about adapting. One of the most important things of any team, I think, is not to be afraid of these discussions, right? They can be hard, they can be tough, but if you welcome them, embrace them, and not just listen for the sake of it, so we can say, oh yeah, we had a safe space, we listened, that's great, let's move on. But actually taking action and adapting and not being afraid to change from what we traditionally have been, I think is really, really important. And then one other thing I just wanted to mention off what John said, even in a hiring process, if you don't get to the candidate you wanted, there is still a way to make progress in that hire. And that is by assessing that hire you're making based on their competency in discussing and understanding these issues. So if you end up with a pool and you think that the finalists are going to be white, male or female, there's still progress to be made there in assessing those candidates for how well they can engage in these discussions. How well are they aware of these issues? How much of a force for good will they be if you bring them on? That's an important component too.
That's a good point, Chris. That's a good point. So at least who you're bringing on, they're buying into the ideas and not negating them. Good. Hollis, I know this was particularly a problem for you too. In one position you were looking to, you weren't getting the diversity of candidates that you had hoped for. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, we're looking to hire an executive editor and regional editor in our Florida newsroom, which is an area that I'm responsible for and directly oversee. And while we've gotten a lot of candidates, not many of them were qualified. I have narrowed down a short list of folks who could fill that position, but I'm certainly open to other candidates applying. Florida man, Florida woman, it's stories fall out of the sky in Florida. And so we think that we get, an abundance of candidates, but that's been a struggle. To your previous question, to your broader question about setting benchmarks, Gannett has set a benchmark of reaching parity with each of the communities it serves wherever we have a publication. And so that goal is set to be reached by 2025. And so diversity standards are in place at all of the publications. There has to be folks in that pool who reflect brown people and black people and women and folks with different sexual orientations, LGBTQ community. It's all of the above. And so that pool is not just a pool that folks get to say, yeah, well, we talked to someone. I randomly spot check, and the company randomly spot checks to ensure that folks are actually interviewing folks and giving them an opportunity. It's a lofty goal. It's a goal that Gannett has set for itself, and it's one that we're on track to reach. The results for each community or each site is published on its website, so the public can go and look at what that newsroom looks like and how it reflects the community that it serves. And so it's an effort at transparency to ensure that we are really putting our money where our mouths are in this instance.
That's really courageous to put it out there for everyone to see and to criticize you, right? When you don't reach it. Very good. John, how about you? Are you set any goals or benchmarks?
I've been listening to the folks talking. I've been trying to think about what, because so, again, it's so much is embedded and sort of muscle memory at this point. And I think about what we do. And the one thing that I'm moving away from staffing for a moment is looking at the page every day and making sure as best we can that every Pennsylvanian sees themselves in our coverage in some way, either in story selection or the sources that we have in the stories, whose voices we're choosing to elevate on the commentary page, for instance. Chris and I are blessed and or cursed to cover an overwhelmingly white male institution, which makes that very, very challenging sometimes. And we really, we work really hard to veer away from sort of that traditional power structure to make sure that, that the people who are advocating for these issues, people of color who are advocating for these issues, and telling the stories from their perspective rather than from the policymakers who are driving the debate, who tend to be overwhelmingly white and male. Just making sure that that's represented every single day. And we're blessed in a lot of our content sharing partnerships with, say, the Philadelphia Tribune or the Philadelphia Gay News or Present Day, that we're able to center those voices every single day. And as the guy who curates the opinion page, Joyce, just as you do at PennLive, I am very intentional about making about what voices appear on our page every single day.
Right. So you haven't set benchmarks for hiring, but you're focused more on what the content is.
I mean, I guess I'll steer the conversation away from hiring for just a moment. We are a staff of 4. So ideally, we would like a staff that looks like our community. That is not always possible for us, but we do have members of our opinion stable who are BIPOC or LGBTQ. So we have at least the representation that way as well.
Okay, Sandy, you want to talk about benchmarks or goals or anything?
Or anything. I'll take anything for 100. There are we're really looking at our baselines to start off with, right? And I do think there should be baselines, obviously, for, do we reflect our community? Although I always think that is minimally where we ought to be, because, whenever we're going, okay, our 10% or 30% of our community is Black, and so let's go for 30%. Why are we going only for 30? Why wouldn't we go for 50, right? So I want to make sure that as we talk about that, we're not also capping diversity because it's just a nice, neat number. I love the idea actually of posting it on the website, so it's something I'll take back to my own organization. I think it's a couple of things. I mean, it's not just, the makeup of your staff. One of the beauties, I think, of public media, I spent most of my career in newspapers, and now I'm in public media. But one of the beauties of it is the ability to have partnerships with more ease, right? And so when I was talking about our engagement work, our staff is certainly diversifying, and we've gone from 80% white to about 65%, right, in about 3 or 4 years, with a lot of intention, not just from me, but from my whole editing staff and hiring staff. But also it's our community partnerships that I think are bringing us so much. Right now we have a news and information exchange, community exchange, where we're working with grassroots partners, mostly of color, not all, who already have credibility in their communities, who unlike big organizations have been doing their work with heart and soul of trying to get vital information and engagement and inclusion to their own communities. So how do we help, fortify them? How do we, what are their needs? And so we've done a lot of sort of capacity building of things that they think they need, right? Not of us going and imposing ourselves on them. And so that partnership has been incredibly rich. I think you do get to the point where you start to know the kind of people you want to hire. And it's not just by the look of a person, but it's by somebody who walks in the door understanding the necessity of this. And so whether you're white, Black, whatever, I expect with everybody who walks in the door as a candidate to be able to talk about this and to reassure me that there's not a buy-in issue here, because I'm really not looking for buy-in. I'm looking for somebody who walks in the door with that kind of orientation already as core to why they're in this business. And so that helps actually, filter out candidates pretty quickly, right? And you send that message in your job postings, and so, hiring for a news director right now, I mean, I think the expectation, it's not just that you can manage a newsroom. I want somebody culturally competent, ready, walking in the door. And so that sometimes you have to hold on positions for a longer period of time, but that's fine. I'd rather not have to convince somebody.
Right, there you go, Hollis. Chris, instead of the BA required, use a cultural competency required. That's a good one. Very good. Listen, a little bit of controversy has reared its ugly head here, but we're gonna stick with it. There's a question that's come in, and I'm gonna let Hollis tackle it first. Says USA Today reported May 5th, 2021, that Mayor of Chicago Lori Lightfoot said she will only grant interviews to journalists of color, and so they want to know, what are your opinions on that, Hollis?
Well, fortunately, we don't have a publication in Chicago, so
Okay.
So an artful dodge, if you will. Wow, that's I don't think that's right. Back when President Obama was in office, I believe the first year of his presidency, in the first few weeks, they refused to grant interviews to folks from Fox News because they called them a wing of the Republican Party, because the Fox News broadcasters and commentators, as well as their reporters, they thought were part of this vast conspiracy to bring shame on his presidency and to bring him down. Look, wrong is wrong, however you look at it. I don't think that it's fair if that's what she's doing. I don't know the facts around that story. I certainly don't support that viewpoint. I've given interviews to publications that I know have a bias, and but I've tried to offer fairness and a straightforward answer to everyone. And we know there is a media echo chamber. We know that, there are folks who watch Fox News or folks who pay attention to CNN or MSNBC looking for a particular angle in some instances. But I think all of those pieces and all of those organizations ought to be taken individually, and you come up with your own answers by having a complete look at the news. And so giving interviews only to one group of folks, whether it's blacks or whites or Asians, is just as bad as giving interviews to just one type of organization, like what we've seen in Florida with Governor DeSantis, who's only given interviews to Republican-leaning news outlets in the state. So wrong is wrong, however you slice it.
Wrong is wrong. NABJ apparently issued a statement on this, I remember seeing, in which, while they disagreed and thought they could not condone that, they understood that she was doing it basically to call attention to what we're talking about right here today, the lack of diversity in newsrooms. And so it was somewhat of a political stunt, but it certainly has gotten our attention. I don't know, anyone else want to comment on that? I won't force you to comment, but if you want to, let me know. Sandy? Chris?
Yeah, she's just like calls names. She says, if you want to talk. No, I'm just talking. I'm just talking to Joyce, because you're doing such a great job moderating. I love how you do it. No, hey, it's what Hollis said. I think it's not helpful. However, it really was, if we thought about, when Trump was in office and he was just attacking particularly Black women journalists. What was the thing that started to change things? It wasn't, Black folks saying like how wrong this was. It was other white journalists going, oh, we see this disparity, we're not going to accept it. And not everybody spoke up, but a few spoke up on behalf. So yes, I do think it's a publicity stunt. I don't think it's very helpful in the greater, sort of information that we get out of journalism. But I think pointing out disparities from time to time is also not a bad thing, because it makes others rise up too.
There you go. Okay, unless John or Chris are chomping at the bit to comment on that, I will ask Ben Schmidt he has apparently a suggestion. He wants to discuss a recruiting strategy they've developed at the Tribune Review. Ben, if you can do it concisely, we'd like to have you offer your ideas.
Oh, thanks. Appreciate it. We've had the same, everything we've talked about in here today. We've had the same discussions in our newsroom. And we talked a lot about becoming more, just being more deliberate when we looked around the room, and still, it's a huge problem. And what we came up with, and we're just in our first year of this, is we created a diversity scholarship for Western Pennsylvania where we were actually not going to colleges, but going to high schools. And senior aspiring journalists could apply. You get 7,500 a year for your tuition for all 4 years. You get an internship every summer, starting this summer after high school, and then you get a job offer at the end of, as long as everything works out. So we just went through that process, and we had a good 15 applicants, and we selected someone about 2 weeks ago. So it was an idea that after we had discussions, it was kind of like, what do we do? How do we do this? And our president came up with this concept and let us run with it. She stepped aside and said, you guys figure it out, but this is the money I'll put up. This is what I'll do. Also, the internship will be paid. So it's a start, and it's a way to, somebody else said, knowing what you're looking for in candidates and how they do the job. This is, each summer we'll work with this person, and hopefully they want to stay here for a while, and then it grows next. And we're going to do this every year. So it just creates a pipeline that I think is really exciting.
Then do you force it? Do they have any sort of contract that says when they graduate, they have to come and spend some time with you, or is it just free for them to do whatever they want?
The internships are required, but it's just a job offer. So you don't have to do it after 4 years. But, even then we'll have, for 4 years, we'll have that person in our newsroom in the summers. And we're going to, contribute to their education. So,
any questions for Ben on the project that he has from our main speakers? You guys, any questions on that? Or, I mean, I think it's a great idea.
I think it's a great idea. My wife was a part of a similar program. She went to Clark Atlanta University, and Cox paid for all 4 years of her college education. And when she graduated, she went to work at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. So they guaranteed a job on the back end. And it was a way that they had a relationship with the HBCUs in Atlanta to create a pipeline of journalists to the AJC, to Dayton, and to Austin, and other publications that it had at the time. And that program lasted successfully for many, many years. I don't believe they do it much now because they've closed all of their newspapers, or sold them rather, with the exception of the Atlanta Journal and Constitution.
Yeah, the PA Media Group has just done a scholarship like that, but this was for a college student going to a graduate program in journalism. But I like the idea of taking them from high school and helping them see their way through college. It makes sense. Let's see. I wanted to say what Joseph has written in newsrooms he's worked with in Scranton now and previously in Wilkes-Barre had better diversity in staffing, but both organizations have since slipped. Hiring is infrequent, and when we do, we don't get diverse candidates looking for work in or move to northeastern Pennsylvania. This discussion, he says, has been helpful and encouraging for us to try more. Very good. Thank you for that encouragement. And just to clarify, when we were speaking about Mayor Lori Lightfoot, she was referring to the anniversary of her inauguration. She would only give interviews to people of Black and brown descent. There were people who were Black and brown, and it wasn't for in general, but it's still worthy of our discussion here. All right. So the other question that's come in as we're nearing a close, at least we should talk about, how do you attract more diverse audiences? I think John has hit on this, but Elizabeth really is asking. She works at a public radio news station, and her audience is historically whiter and older. So Sandy, that's a perfect one for you to take on.
Yeah. Well, I think that applies to newspapers and public media. I think most public media stations have that. And how did we get that makeup of audience? Because they were fed, right? And so I think we got to look at, what we're feeding our audiences, as well as, the voices that they hear. I mean, we're not going to, and audience and community are two different things, by the way. So, there's the diversification of audience, and if you're listening all day long and you're never hearing a person of color, you're never hearing perspectives that are centered around the conversations and the way people of color would have it, you're not going to capture this audience, right? I think public media has I call it a price of admission problem, because it's not just about race and ethnicity. I mean, it's look, I think if you're looking at younger folks too, it's not like young people are flocking to public media either. But it's so framed itself for such a long time around you guys are just smarter than everybody else. You're the ones who are educated and want to be more educated. And I think that there is something that is exclusionary about that. And not enough effort has been put into really just, programming, the kinds of people you hire. There's something very intimate, particularly about radio, where you have an opportunity to make a change, I think, really, really quickly. I mean, there's very intimate connection to a voice. If we don't have that, and it can't just be at the local level. I mean, NPR's got to do its work too, right? Because if that is 80% of your programming, if the mothership's not doing the work, then at the local level, I think we can only make some change. We have seen our African American audience grow at WHYY with intention of both community engagement as well as our programming and the people we're hiring.
Right. Well, let me just tell you, having worked at NPR for about 7 or 8 years in the good old days, not much has changed with diversity. I'm just telling you that. So you're right. The mothership has to do her job as well. John, you want to talk? I mean, you did talk a little bit about attracting and engaging audience. You're looking at your content. Do you see it? Do you see it having an impact?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just from, we see our email chatter, we see the interactions we have on social media, and the sense is, we offer this array of voices that we are now known as this destination where you can come for that. And I think Sandy is right. It's really about creating as many entry points as you possibly can, right up and into including speaking to readers in their own language. Which is why we have the Estrella-Capital section twice a week, which is why we have the partnership with Presente in Pittsburgh. You look around Pennsylvania, you look at Reading, you look at Lancaster, you look at Lebanon County, you look at Lehigh County, where Latino and populations are ascendant. And so you need to not only do you need to provide them with the content that's going to resonate, you also need to speak to those communities in their own voices. So we're very lucky to have a wonderful Spanish translator who translates our work for us so that we can target those audiences and be known as that source, because we really do believe that it's periodismo para todos, news for everyone, and we really believe that's the case.
Thank you. Chris, do you want to comment on just attracting those diverse audiences?
Well, I think a big part of it is staff, right? That people see themselves in the staff, and that staff understand those issues and know where to go and what questions to ask and what stories to pitch. I mean, I think that's a huge part of it. I don't think you can really get to the audience you want if your staff's not there. And just to go back actually to the Lightfoot thing real quick, I think the sort of main issue aside, I think what it does raise is the fact that if journalism and newsrooms are not committed and reflecting these values, it makes it real hard for us to go out and write investigations and write accountability stories about the government and about organizations or big corporations on these issues. If we're not sort of reflecting that ourselves. So I think in that sense, I think that, highlights that issue again. But yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to staff and story choice and who you're putting forward and what stories you're writing. And also beyond that, I mean, I think sometimes this is overlooked a little bit, but most of us as newsrooms do a lot more than write stories now, right? We've got newsletters, we've got podcasts, we've got text alerts, we've got events, and these issues need to permeate those. What events are we putting on? What do our panelists look like? Who, where do they come from? What are our other product offerings? Do those products look and feel white, or have they been thought through with that strategy? I think that is all really important to audience beyond just what stories we're writing.
Good point. We are doing a whole lot more. I'll let Hollis have the last word on this before I turn it back over to Melinda.
Well, thank you, Joyce, and thank you all for the conversation today. I think it's been quite enlightening. I think the answer there is balance in understanding that we have to cover communities holistically, that we can't parachute in just for the crime stories and not be there for the garden club or not be there for the graduation rates. It has to be an approach that reflects all of that community and not one aspect of it. And then finally, we need to be in those places where people are. We know that there is an exponential growth happening on Instagram. We know that Twitter is seeing an explosive growth, especially for people of color. We know that TikTok is a place that's growing fast as well. So creating content that speaks to those audiences where they are is our challenge moving forward. And so the organization that is successful in doing that is going to be the one that brings a diverse audience, is going to bring an informed audience, is going to bring an educated audience, and thus is going to bring us advertising revenue and a general success that we're all seeking.
Well, thank you, Hollis, and thank you to all of the speakers, the panelists, and even to Ben, who came in with and became a speaker and shared some insight. So we really appreciate your time. Good luck. You've got a good mission, and keep at it. Melinda?
Great job, Joyce.
Yeah, thank you, Joyce. You did a wonderful job moderating, and thank you to the panelists. When Sandra Hardy approached us last year and offered this grant money, we were so excited about putting together this series, and I think this is an awesome reflection of what she wanted to accomplish with that money. And I thank you all for providing such fascinating information on what you're doing, the challenges and the obstacles, but what you're doing to make it successful, and that it is at the front of everyone's mind. And we're delighted to be involved in this. And we look forward to doing additional sessions and hope that you will join us for those. We have recorded this, and we will provide the recording to all of those that were on here, as well as anyone who registered who wasn't able to make it, or who left early or signed in later or whatever, because I think everything that was said from beginning to end was extremely important and valuable. So thank you again to everyone. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon, a great weekend, and all take care. Yep, thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye, guys. Thank you.
See you later.
Bye-bye.